Weird. Okay, hold on one sec.
Sure, take your time.
I just gotta figure out the camera situation.
No problem.
Strange. In Skype.
Say one more time.
In Skype, the camera's working, but for some reason, it's not showing up here.
Huh. I am not set up for Skype.
No, it's okay. I'll get this worked out.
Do you have at the top of the screen, do you have the camera enabled?
Yeah, it says camera not working, which is weird because I just tested it.
Oh, we don't need video unless you brought show and tell.
It's all good. Let me try. I'm gonna log back out and back in and see if that kicks it into gear. You know, classic computer stuff.
Yeah, this link should still work. I think he's gone already.
Oh, holy crap! Have you come to work?
I'm barking my entire life. I barking my life.
I bargained my heart in.
That's a true fact. I bargained my soul.
Oh, we're actually right on time. I thought we were late.
No.
I
got to practice. Yo, what's good, cuz?
You need a minute.
Just pops out of nowhere. So I'm running in solo.
On a mini fridge? Who's gonna stock this mini fridge? You're gonna bring water and cake and put it in there?
I'll bring the water. I'll bring cookies.
I'll bring my happiness.
Can someone bring cheesecake?
Can somebody bring pastelitos?
Bro, I got you. I got you. I got a piece of work.
Yeah, I don't even know
Without what?
That's what you should do. That is so good. And not like
Bro, I'm gonna play a Chinese food. You got the whole front.
yes. Everybody would want to try Steve Bob's.
Bro, you got the whole front.
We'd be like for the food and stuff. We'd be like for the food or for us.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh,
There he is.
There he is. It worked.
Sweet.
It's worked.
Excellent. Can you hear me okay?
I can hear you great. You can hear us?
Fantastic. I like the guy in the back just popping up there. That was good.
Somebody's so this is the first time this school year that we are doing video chat instead of live and in person. So I've got students asking me questions. I'm going to answer real quick. It switches who's talking at the moment. So right now it's on us, but if Jim talks, Jim, go for it.
Right. So when I talk, it should put me in the front position.
There you go. So there's that. I'm going to ask that everybody, particularly on the end, if you guys have questions, and Jose, please stop bumping into something, making noise. If you guys have questions, please make sure you are nice and loud. We all good?
Yes.
Okay. Jim, I got one quick note for you, and then I'm going to jump into a big, long narrative. Is that cool?
Sweet.
Okay. One, I just want to point out that our students made this when we first started in this school 5 years ago. We didn't have the fancy smart boards and stuff. So they made it with a Kinect camera from the Xbox and a bunch of other things. And they put AI in it so you could talk to it and tell it what to do.
Nice.
Right now, it's just an old beat up computer that we're using a projector on the wall. So that being said, it is known to crash. And if it does, I'll probably take 2 minutes to reboot and then dial you back up. It shouldn't happen. Maybe it happens once on a bad day.
Right.
So please forgive us if that happens. And so I'm gonna start. Everybody ready?
Yeah.
Okay. I don't know if you understand. I'm gonna kill you and throw you out the room.
Hey.
All right, so everybody on one conversation, please. All right, so this is Roberto. You are back with the Steambox crew at Alvarez High School. Steambox crew, please say what's up.
What's up?
Starbucks.
And there's the obligatory endorsement to Starbucks is not giving us money.
It don't matter. It's an obligation.
So today I feel very fortunate because we've got Mr. Jim Zub from I'm gonna say from Marvel Comics, is that a proper place? Or
Well, I'm a freelance comic writer, and a lot of the work I'm doing is for Marvel. So I wouldn't say that I represent Marvel, but I'm doing a lot of work there. So
right, because we're also reading IDW books, right? Like Rick and Morty meets Dungeons and Dragons.
nice.
Yeah. So we've had a chance to check out some of the work, and we read a little bit about you working on some Android projects. I'm probably going to ask you about that in a minute. But first, I just want to let everybody know, and these students, of course, know, but I want to let everybody know why this was so important right now. In our community, a neighboring school that I was at the time had a school shooting right outside this school. And it was devastating to the community. It was devastating to us. I actually feel like some of us are dealing with it in different ways. Some of us are numb to the violence, and because we've seen homies die before, which is terrible. But I, working with these students and wanting the best for these students, I was having a real hard time processing it, wondering what I should have done. What more can I do?
Sure.
And at that magical time, I picked up Champions because I'm a big Miles Morales fan, a big Marvel fan. And Champions, that same week, just happened to serendipitously help me process the event of a student dying, of a murder at the school, as Miles Morales, aka Spiderman, was going through some of the same things. So that's why we're here today. I found that just a magical timing. I haven't seen school shootings in comic books before. How did that come to be?
I mean, it was this is what makes sort of the relationship I've got at Marvel really special. Like, you know, Marvel's part of Disney. Disney is the biggest entertainment corporation in the world. And yet, when it comes to making the comics, it's still very much kind of a small creative team. So we've got, you know, I've got 2 editors that I work with, along with the editor-in-chief. And they're very supportive of us coming up with our own story ideas, really developing stuff that we're passionate about, and making, you know, we want to tell great, entertaining superhero stories, but that doesn't mean that we can't kind of delve into or explore other stuff that we think is important. And so earlier this year, you know, I talked to my editor and I said, look, of all the books that Marvel's publishing, I think Champions has the most connected to this kind of storyline. And I feel like we have something that we can say really through these characters, because so many of them are high school students, because so many of them are in this kind of situation. And it would have been really easy, honestly, for my editor to just say, you know, we don't want to touch this. It's way too controversial. It's a hot button item. Just do something else. Do a classic superhero kind of story. Don't worry about this stuff. But what's great about Tom Brevoort and some of the other editors at Marvel is that they know that when Marvel was first getting started in the 60s, they leaned into these kinds of topics. They leaned into social issues. They leaned into things that were happening all over the world. Stan Lee used to infamously say that Marvel reflected the world outside our window. And that can still be true, you know? And so I said I wanted to give this a shot. My editor gave me the benefit of the doubt and let me pitch a story. And pitching a story doesn't mean you instantly get to do whatever you want, but it's at least putting the idea forward and trying to get, you know, momentum behind it and prove that this is a worthy story that we can do well in a comic. And so because of the nature of it, we gave ourselves a much longer lead time to develop the story, to bounce it back and forth. It went through a lot more editorial oversight than a regular issue. I'd say we spent about 2 to 3 times as long developing the issue. We gave Sean, the artist, extra time to draw it. And once we realized that it was going to go through, I asked if we could have it come out in September, because I felt that the timing with the start of the school year was the right time to release it.
It really was. I mean, it was certainly magical for me. You helped me with a tough moment, and some of these students have picked up the issue too, and we were passing it around a little bit. And I'm hoping that it offered some of them an opportunity to process this too. It's honestly, as I look across their faces and we talk about it, I can't tell if they're trying to be big about this situation, or if they're just numb to the violence.
Sure.
It shouldn't be.
I mean, this is one of those difficult things. Like everyone processes this stuff differently, and that was what was important for me as well when we were developing the storyline. Each of the team members kind of has their own approach as well. That there's not just one simple consensus, you know, and there's no one solution either. It's really about bigger things, about morality and about emotional content and about how we deal with any kind of tragedy, but in this case specifically, you know, gun violence.
I really appreciate that. I'm going to turn it over to these guys in a second. They had questions, particularly you mentioned Stan Lee. I think somebody had a Stan Lee question too.
Sure.
But before I do, I want to say thank you because you also gave, one of my students was talking about Viv and how important it is that she has like a natural seat at the table. And I feel the same way, particularly about Kamala Khan and Riri Williams. Those characters are very important to me. And reading that book, not only was I processing this stuff, but they were also like very worthy contributions from some of the other team members in a really supportive capacity. So I really appreciate that. And that's one of those things that, you know, I worry about, and I worry about the next writer picking up, right? Like after Bendis leaves, I worry about the next writer picking up Miles Morales. What's going to happen? What's this rumor about Spidey? Oh no, you know, I hope things turn out all right.
Well, I don't know if you saw the announcement. Saladin Ahmed's going to be doing the new Miles Morales series. He's a great writer, and we've had some great conversations back and forth. Like Marvel is really committed to this next generation of heroes that they're developing. You know, when I was younger, there were new heroes that were being introduced all the time, and they meant a lot to me growing up. And so I feel like a good kind of responsibility that I want to deliver, you know, stories that matter to teenagers, to adults, to everyone about these heroes. And what's exciting for me is that as much as I love writing older characters I grew up with, these characters in particular at the Champions, they don't have hundreds of stories beneath them. Some of them may only have, you know, 10 or less in some cases, or someone like Snowguard, a new character we introduced in the Champions. I got to make that character, and every story so far I've written of her, they're crucial to her development now. They're the core of what is going to be her character moving forward. And so adding new pieces to the Marvel Universe is like a nerdy dream come true for me, and I really want to do it right, and I want to do right by these characters.
Let me know when you're ready to have Steambox characters. I got you. We can work on this.
Nice.
Somebody had a Stan Lee question. So why don't you come into screen a little bit?
Sure.
Nice and loud.
Hey.
I had a question, and that is, how does it feel to work? Or do you have the blessing of the man himself, Stan Lee?
So Stan, I've met once. And Stan, really, when he kind of stepped away from writing comics on a regular basis, one of the things he did is he said to everyone that works on this stuff that the best thing we can do is tell stories that he would, to do new and different things with these characters, because that's what keeps them vital. I had a similar conversation with Brian Michael Bendis, who developed him, Riri Williams, and Miles Morales. He and I jumped on a phone call, and I was really nervous about taking them both over for Champions. And he said, don't worry about what I would do. If you do a story that is meaningful and emotional to you, you're going in the right direction. And these characters live because we all contribute cool ideas, because we build new things and add to the Marvel Universe. And that's really important. So it's kind of an interesting thing that Stan is a great leader because he doesn't need to do everything, because he didn't need to kind of choke the life out of other people's concepts, and that what he did is created a great foundation and a framework for all of us to be able to build a cool story.
Thank you. Anybody else? Go for it. Let me know if you're having trouble hearing.
No, so far so good.
I wanted to know how hard was it to get your foot in the door at Marvel Comics?
It was tough. It's so weird now because sometimes it feels like I've been doing this for a while, and other times I feel like I'm really new at it. But even though I'm not, I've been writing at Marvel, I guess, for about almost 5 years now. But before that, I started developing my own comics And that's really the key here, is that you need to make stuff at a professional level, no matter what you want to do, whether that's creative stuff or you know, any kind of skill base, before someone is going to pay you to do it for them. That's the real simple truth of it. So I started making my own comics and putting them online originally, and learning how comic book stories were told. And there's a difference between reading stories and making stories. You know, I read comics all the time, I watch movies all the time, I read books, I watch TV. But when you start to make stuff, you really look at it with a different eye. You start to be much more critical about how these things are made and how your own stories get made. And so as I made comics, I would learn a lot. You can read tutorials, you can read how-to books, but as you guys have learned, you know, getting your hands dirty, like doing this stuff, really building things, is how you learn that much quicker. And so I started making my own comics back in, late 2001. I did my own comic story online for like 2 years, and then I took a break for a little while. I had other work that I was doing. I've been working in the animation field for several years, but that wasn't even as a writer, that was as a production artist. And then I realized that the more artwork I was doing for other people, what I really missed was developing stories. And so I started teaming up with other artists, working on all kinds of different projects, and getting back into the groove on it. And even then, I launched a comic through Image in 2009, and I wouldn't start writing for Marvel until 2013. And so it was like 4 solid years of making my own stuff, putting things out there, working for other comic book companies, and building up a portfolio. You know, I wasn't necessarily just trying to work for Marvel. I love writing all kinds of different stuff and making all kinds of good stories, but I finally kind of got on their radar, and they reached out to me about a couple projects. And even then, within Marvel, I had to work on sort of lower tier stuff. There's a whole line of books that are like advertising comics that they do for clients. Like it sounds really dorky, but if they do like a giveaway comic in a box of cereal for a contest, like someone has to write that stuff. And it may not sound very sexy or cool, but that's the kind of development work that you do to show that you understand how this stuff works, hit your deadlines, follow format, take edits well, and build up trust. And that's a huge part of any creative endeavor, is building up trust with your collaborators. And finally getting the chance to start working on some, you know, larger tier properties and writing superheroes in the main Marvel universe. And even then, I could still have screwed it up. It took time to really get a reputation for, solidly delivering work, coming up with good ideas, and taking, editorial feedback well.
And now
so
you're breaking the ground.
The short version of that is a long time, but the long version is that all along the way, I was doing all sorts of cool stuff that I was proud of, and all of it sort of builds into, my writing career. Like, it's not like I just want to work at Marvel and that's it. Like, if I write, an Avengers story, which I've done, that's the end goal. Like, you have to look at your career as a constant growing thing. And even now that I'm doing really cool stuff that I like at Marvel, I've got other kind of mountains I want to climb and other things I want to do.
And cross medium too, right? Not just comic books. Was there Android games? What was the deal with that? How many were you working on?
Yeah, so what happened was I was working for a studio called Udon, and they do all sorts of artwork for different clients, like movies and games, animation and comics. And normally they were just doing the art end of things, but they got hired to do some development that included some writing. And so we got to do writing on video games. I got to sort of contribute to all kinds of different projects. And what was neat about it is like week to week and month to month, we were always doing something different. So you'd be working on a movie project one week, and then you'd be working on toy stuff the next week, or video games. Everything was a cool challenge because you had to just, the goalpost keeps moving. You don't just have one thing that you do day in and day out. I think that's a big difference about kind of the sorts of careers and jobs that like my generation and your generation are going to have compared to my parents or my grandparents. Like, a lot of times my parents and my grandparents, they would have a job and they would stay at that job through to retirement. They would do the same thing for 25, 30 years. And nowadays, I remember reading an article somewhere. They said most people are going to go through 5 or 6 careers in their lifetime. They're going to try different things. They're going to jump into different types of jobs or occupations. They're going to move up the ladder or move sideways to whole other industries. And I find that really exciting. I like having new challenges and trying out different stuff.
We've got a super subjective question for you.
Okay.
I see how you handle it.
Okay, when you write your book and you see how many people love it and how many people read it, do you consider yourself famous?
I don't. So for me, like within the context of a comic convention, so like tomorrow, I'm flying to New York to go to the New York Comic Con. I'm really excited about it. I love the show. There's tons of friends there. And within that context, I might get recognized by a handful of people, or I'll see a bunch of industry folks who know me. But if we walk like 3 blocks away from the convention center, no one's going to know who I am. And that's sort of a good thing. Like, because I can go to a restaurant and I can have a normal kind of interaction with people. I've been to parties or situations where I see people you would consider celebrities, like really famous actors, and they don't have a moment to themselves. Like they don't have a moment of privacy. They can't really interact with people on a normal level. Every moment there's this sense of their privacy is getting invaded. Their conversations are getting invaded. People want to be their friends. People want things from them. And I find that a little bit overwhelming and creepy. I'm sure, there's lots of benefits and hey, who wouldn't want to be rich? But in terms of fame, I don't really see it as fame. It's nice to have my name on something and to have people appreciate it. It's nice within the context of a comic book show to have people appreciate what I do. I've had a couple weird moments. Like I was in Tokyo a couple years ago at Tokyo Disneyland, and someone was following my social media and tracked me down so they could say hi because I was like live tweeting about the park. That was kind of creepy. My wife was like, hey, stop live tweeting because apparently people can follow you around Japan. So I would be like, okay, I'll save up my photos and I'll upload them when we get back to the hotel at night. But that's a pretty extreme example. Most of the time, like I said, outside of a comic convention, it's really not going to be a thing, and that's probably for the best.
I want to introduce you to my Riri Williams. The reason I say that is because she's my 17-year-old genius. Just today we were considering MIT.
Cool.
Malate, say hi.
Hi.
Hello, how are you?
I'm good. How are you?
Good, doing well.
Question?
Yeah. Like before Marvel, what was your favorite person to write for?
That's a good question. So I did a comic series of Samurai Jack, and that's the stories that take place in between like season 4 and 5. And so I got to work with the gang at Cartoon Network, and like Gendy Tartakovsky and one of the character designers, who's become a really good friend of mine. That was a really cool project. It was a lot of fun. And it was, really exciting because I love that show. I really like the properties. But honestly, like the books I've done at Image, which are called creator-owned comics, like you've got work that you do for a client. We call that work for hire. So Marvel hires me. They own the stuff that I produce for them. When I create a comic that's creator-owned, I own it. So I control it. I get to come up with the concept. So I've done a few of those through a comic company called Image, the guys that publish The Walking Dead. And those projects honestly mean the most to me because they're all real passion projects. I came up with the idea from scratch. I work with the art team. We developed it together. We co-own it, and we get to take it in kind of any direction we want. And so I love the commercial writing. I love doing work for Marvel. I've done writing for like Disney and Dungeons and Dragons, all kinds of different properties that like 10-year-old me is still freaking out about. But my creator-owned stuff is really near and dear to my heart.
And Namco, Bandai, and Hasbro as well.
Yeah, I've done work for Hasbro and Namco. I've done work for Legendary Pictures and just all kinds of different cool clients.
I have to write, like my secret passion that I only tell people super close is this fanfic that I have for G.I. Joe where I flip it. They're kind of the bad guys.
Nice.
Like one
G.I.
day.
Joe was the first comic that I collected back in the 80s. So yeah, that stuff was good stuff.
So Malate and I talk about it sometimes, and we get a little angry. We don't think Riri Williams would make those decisions to dress up in pink with a big heart and call herself. I don't think Williams would ever call herself Ironheart. I know it's just my opinion, but
Sure.
I can't imagine that happening. What goes on? Is that like a marketing decision or?
Yes, some of the stuff. One of the things about working in something like the sandbox of the Marvel Universe is there's stuff that you have control over, or things, ideas that you bring into the mix, and sometimes it gets turned into, material that gets used, and other times there's stuff that's already been decided, and you're sort of working with what you've been given. So she was already called Ironheart, obviously, before I took over.
We blame Bendis? Can I blame Bendis? Can I right now be like, Bendis?
You can blame Brian. Yeah, just tell Brian it's all wrong. It's not the first time he's heard it, I'm sure. And then in terms of the new suit design, so what'll happen is sometimes I get brought in on stuff like that where they'll show me sketches and I'll say, okay, this is my preference. I think this design looks good. And it's like I've got one vote, but then there's a whole bunch of other people that are voting on the same kind of stuff. And obviously, C.B. Cebulski or Tom Brevoort, my editors, they've got a lot more. Their votes are worth more than mine in this hierarchy. So I know there were probably 5 or 6 different armor designs that we went through before they settled on this one that they've got right now.
Go for it.
I was wondering who your personal favorite hero is.
So I've kind of got 2 of them. Like I was a Spider-Man kid growing up. Like Peter Parker was my guy, nerdy kid. It meant a lot to me that Peter was this flawed character who just tried to do the best he could no matter what, and he believed in that idea of responsibility for his actions, and that he was really trying to make up for mistakes that he had made right from his origin. So like Spider-Man was my guy. I collected Amazing Spider-Man for over 10 years growing up, and I read this stuff crazy. But I also really like Doctor Strange, and the reason why is because my brother and I played a lot of Dungeons and Dragons growing up, and it meant a lot to me. I love sword and sorcery stuff. Fantasy stories are some of my favorites. And so there was a guy who was both like a wizard and a superhero. So he must be the coolest dude as far as I was concerned when I'm like 8 or 9 years old. So Doctor Strange and Spider-Man are kind of probably my two favorite heroes.
Nice. We're going to do 2 more questions. Do we have, go.
So like I ain't trying to say nothing, but like
sounds like you're trying to say something.
No, but like it kind of surprised me because I was like, when I heard about like a multiracial and a multi-religious person in a comic book, I was thinking that the person that wrote that comic.
Not multi-religious. She's got the. I'm sorry.
Oh,
go ahead.
I said it like yeah, but you got what I mean, right?
Yeah, I got you.
Right. I heard about that. I was like, I thought that the person that wrote that would be like, a person of color. They understand it. You feel me? Like
sure. Well, I mean, the Ms. Marvel series is written by G. Willow Wilson, and she's Muslim, and so she helped develop that character with Sana Amanat, who is also a woman of color, and so a lot of these characters are being developed by multiple people. Brian Michael Bendis developed Miles Morales and Riri Williams, but all sorts of other people have added their 2 cents into it as well. And I think it's important that these characters absolutely represent different people, but that the best thing that we can do is tell great stories that make everyone love these characters. Like I want everyone to read, Ms. Marvel, not just people of that particular color or faith, but because it's a great heroic story, because she's inspiring to anyone and shows us that anyone can be a hero. And so in that same way, I try and get all my details right, and I bounce ideas off of other people. But at the end of the day, it's about telling really compelling universal stories through the lenses of these characters.
When we were talking about these questions, I found that super interesting because I was wondering if my perspective on that question was, do you ever find it challenging or does it make you nervous to find the voice of a Kamala Khan?
Yeah, you've got to do your homework. Like, you've got to do it right. So I'll give you an example from a different project. So one of the books I do, one of my image comics is called Wayward, and it's about teenagers in Japan. Well, I'm not a Japanese teenager, but the artist I'm working with lives over there. And so we do lots and lots of back and forth development. I do tons of research. I bounce it off multiple people to try and get those elements right, to make sure that I'm telling a good story, but I'm also trying to get those details. And I think it's really valuable for you yourself as well to look to other people, to look to other cultures, to look to other religions and nationalities and try and understand them. You know, whenever I'm talking to people about what friends of mine or students that I've taught, and they say they have an opportunity to travel, whether it's to take on a job opportunity or just to go places, I say, go. Like, if you can go somewhere new, if you can have those experiences, they will enrich you and they will show you the commonalities of who we are as people. And that's really, really important. So it's like, I want to get my details right. I want to get those voices right. And I try not to have an ego about assuming that I know every last thing about this. Bounce it off of my editors, bounce it off of people I know, bounce it off of what we call sensitivity readers who are of a particular nationality or faith or what may have you, so that they're able to give us their expertise and feedback as well.
How's the feedback been so far? And how was the feedback for the shooting issue?
We were all kind of braced for negative feedback off of the school shooting issue. And we've been pleasantly surprised that the vast majority of feedback we got was extremely positive, really great reviews, really, well thought out and very emotional responses from readers and from retailers. And so I think all of us on the team were proud. You know, you're always going to have, one of the weird things about being on social media is when you have thousands and thousands and thousands of people that are responding to anything you do, some people are going to be negative, and you can't let that be the only thing that you hear. You know, if one person out of 100 says something really negative, it can be really easy to stay focused on that. And that's not to say that we don't want critique, because absolutely, if someone gives me a valid bit of criticism, I want to learn and I want to do better. Or if it's a full-on mistake, I want to fix it, particularly when we're putting together the trade paperback collections. But on the whole, like I said, the feedback has been great. The response to, Champions right now is really strong. We're trying to tell really great, adventure stories, action stories that have got a core of kind of the teenage experience, like the fears and the responsibilities and the things that, you're trying to do with your generation as you're trying to figure out your way. You guys are going to be like, I know it sounds really dramatic, but you're going to inherit the world at some point. It's going to be yours. And that's what the Champions represents to me, is that they're trying to do right by, people and make sure that they are showing well for this generation in a sense.
At the beginning of that issue, they're not fighting Dr. Doom, right? Like, they're making a community center, right? Was it something like that?
And that's really at the core of what Mark Waid and Humberto Ramos built with the first run of Champions, is they wanted a group of heroes that were addressing things that they felt like teams like the Avengers maybe were ignoring, that in the big picture of big bad evil, they weren't thinking about the people that they're supposed to be protecting.
Man, I hope you know that when you're writing these characters, that like Viv is so important, Miles Morales is one of my nephews. Riri's, in the room with me.
Yeah, it's a cool feeling and it's a responsibility, and I try never to take that for granted, honestly.
I have one more question to throw at you.
What would you like to say to high school students, or even people in general who want to work for Marvel one day, Marvel Comics?
I think, and I get asked this quite a bit, I think what you need to do is you need to build stories that are meaningful to you. Sometimes people will get it in their head that they need to, that if they can't write Spider-Man, or they're not going to write Wolverine or X-Men or something that's their favorite, that somehow they've failed. And if you want to be a storyteller, if you want to be a writer and this is your vocation, you need to learn how to sort of tap into your emotions, your ideas, your thoughts, and tell relevant stories, whether they're superhero stories, whether they're fantasy or science fiction or slice of life or anything at all. Whatever kind of stories you tell, make sure that you are passionate about them, because that will come through in the final work. Your quality will grow, your refinement will improve as you continue to make stuff. But if you're telling something that is important to you, that is the kind of stuff that whoever it is, Marvel or any other client or any other publisher, is going to respond to. I think that when people pigeonhole themselves and they try and figure out what the most popular thing is right now, or what is really cool, or what is the current trend, because they're afraid to tap into something personal. You know, one of the first stories that I did was about my fears of, becoming an adult, like a teenage character afraid of the responsibility of being an adult. The next story I did was about my love of sword and sorcery and Dungeons and Dragons. And it came out in a market where a lot of people said, man, fantasy doesn't sell. Why are you doing this? And I was like, because I really want to tell this story, because it means something to me. And readers responded to it. So, when Robert Kirkman made The Walking Dead, because of his love of zombie movies and survival horror and these fears about a world that we're destroying, the market, there were no black and white horror books that were selling well in the market. And it carved out its own success because it was heartfelt and extremely well done. So rather than worrying about what can I do that's going to be popular, make something that you're passionate about and that you feel very strongly about, and you will find readers that are passionate about the same things or that you speak to strongly. And that's how you build an audience, that's how you build a voice, and that's how you get on the radar of a company like Marvel.
You mentioned Robert Kirkman, and that's kind of funny because he followed that path. And before Walking Dead, he was in that when he was working on he and I had pizza at Giordano's Pizza in Chicago.
Nice.
And all I wanted to talk about was his book, Battle Pope.
Mm-hmm.
And I can be honest, I love comic books. I couldn't give a shit about Battle Pope, but he was dope. Like, Kirkman was like a dope dude. I don't know that he's gonna have some amazing property one day, but he was the most interesting character at the table, And we had cool
people. And that passion, I see this with so many creators. Like, I'll see people who they're trying to sort of trend hop and they look for something they think is popular, and they just like, well, I'll tell this story because this will make me money. And you're like, you can't go into this and write checks on fame that you think you're going to have. All you can do is tell stories that you're passionate about and build things that you think matter, because the amount of time this takes and the amount of effort that it takes, if you're not passionate about it, man, when it's not going well, when things are difficult or you're not successful, you need to have that fire burning within you to keep going. I've had the benefit of working on some great properties. And earlier this year, I was Avengers as the Infinity War movie was coming out. So I did a signing in downtown New York at Times Square, Midtown Comics, and we had a huge line. And it was a great feeling, but I've had signings where no one showed up. I've had conventions where I sat at my table twiddling my thumbs for 3 days. And you don't know where these things are going to go. You can't make assumptions. You can't do this because you want to be famous. You can't do this because you want to sign an autograph. You got to tell stories because it's something that means something to you deep inside.
Thank you for that. This is Gadiel, right behind me.
Hey.
Gadiel is afraid to ask you the question, and I maybe made him pessimistic about it, but he wrote 3 or 4 times that he's not going to rest until you put Steambox in comic book. But while that would be a joke shout out, but while we're on shout outs, who do you want to shout out? Who do you want to send some love to?
In terms of what? In terms of like books I'm reading.
Some people talk about their moms. Some people talk about their creative partners. Some people talk about somebody who's recognized, one of the heroes.
Sure. I mean, I will tell you flat out that I've been very thankful that my parents have been quite supportive. Like, early in my creative career, they were afraid. They were afraid that this wasn't going to be that I couldn't make a living at this. They were never upset about what I wanted to do. They were just worried about the stability of it. You know what I mean? Like, how do you make money telling stories, let alone in comics, let alone all this nerdy stuff that I love? They didn't have any context for it. Early on, when I was making my own comics in 2002 and I was putting them online, there's this guy, you might know him. I mean, I know you well, but the students may or may not, named Scott McCloud. And he made this book called Understanding Comics. He became a real advocate for the web early on, before the internet was the ubiquitous thing it is now. And I was putting stories online, and most people were doing online comics that were like, kind of like comic strips. They were like gag strips, 3 or 4 times a week. And I was doing this really dramatic story, very much like a classic kind of narrative. And Scott keyed into it early, and he really liked it, and he reached out to me. And he said, you should come to San Diego Comic-Con. And I was like, there's no possible way. I have nowhere to stay. I can't get a badge. I can't afford a plane ticket. He got me a badge. He put me in touch with a bunch of people who offered me crash space on their floor of their hotel. And the only thing I needed was a plane ticket, and I couldn't afford it. I was working, but I was just barely getting by. And my older brother, who, we grew up together reading comics, playing D&D. He talked to my dad about it, and he said, you don't understand this stuff at all, but Jim's has an opportunity here, and it's going to pass him by. I'm going to get all the clenched here. And my dad bought the plane ticket for me out of the blue. Even though he didn't understand, even though he doesn't like comics or care, he knew I cared, and he knew it meant a lot to me. And he bought me a plane ticket, and I got to go to my first comic convention. And I thought that would be the only time I would ever do anything like that ever. And now we're talking, it's 16 years later. I've been to probably 250 comic conventions, and this is my job, and that could not have happened without their trust in me and their faith in me, So, yeah.
I wish I could say the same. My dad would never have bought me that. Sounds like it's better. Life is better than cubicle, so that's pretty dope.
What's that?
Is that a yes for a comic book?
Yeah. So
Oh my God.
he's still trying to hustle you to put Steambox in a comic book.
Nice.
I just want to. You mentioned San Diego Comic Con. Any chance you're at Rhode Island Comic Con next month?
Sorry, am I at which?
Rhode Island.
I'm not. No, I'm at New York this week. And then my next convention is November. I'm doing Vienna, Austria, which is wild. Yeah, thanks to comics, like, we've been able to travel all over the world. In July, we were in South Africa. I went to Johannesburg for a comic convention. I've been to Tokyo. I've been to London, England. I've been to Europe and all over the States. It's pretty incredible.
That's dope. We're going back to Tokyo in April. We are
sweet. That's a great time of year to go, man. That's like cherry blossom season. It's amazing.
Yeah, we went in July last time, and it was the worst.
It is scorching. Yeah, July's brutal.
Yeah, we're not doing it anymore. So I am going to, please send me your t-shirt size and an address where I could send you one of these very cool Steambox swag t-shirts.
Nice, man. Sweet.
I'm going to get one of those, and we thank you for your time. This is Steambox Podcast. Steambox, please say peace out.
Bye.
Starbucks! Comic book for Steambox.